all a game, and I think that's the way fashion should be for men. It's like they take it so seriously because they think the meaning to anything, you know, that if you wear this and that, you look like you're gay, or if you do this or that. It's really totally, I find totally retarded.
For over 20 years, Hedi Slimane has rocked the fashion world, bringing his obsession with music culture and pop icons into a new wave of designs that cross gender lines, redefined the waist, and placed shoulder pads back on top.
Try to explore what already exists in the streets, which is a certain idea of wearing clothes, of behaving. This exists, it's just trying to translate it through Dior.
Is it a new masculinity, or is it just a pure masculinity?
No, I think it's an evolution of masculinity.
His love for androgyny led to an influx of men's style, and the era of the skinny suit and tie was born. Slimane is a true artisan, uncompromising to his vision, which has been at the heart of his tumultuous ride, the extreme highs and lows of his career. From rebranding the house of Yves Saint Laurent to his next chapter at Celine, Slimane continues to push buttons and boundaries in pursuit of the great design.
Everything is new, and in fact nothing is new. Nothing is new because like what we're trying to do on the Yves Gauche line now is not like trying to be modern, or try to be young just to be young. It's really much like trying to be Saint Laurent.
Hedi Slimane had been designing at Yves Saint Laurent for 3 years before the house of Gucci acquired it. He had arrived almost by accident. His work as a Louis Vuitton assistant had drawn the attention of the Saint Laurent CEO, Pierre Berger, who tapped him as the man to turn around the moribund fortunes of their menswear line. Slimane had just begun to find his signature style when Gucci, led by their hallowed creative director Tom Ford, stormed the offices of YSL. Ford had been raised to deity status by reversing the fortunes of the flagging Italian label. Now he looked to do the same for the French at Yves Saint Laurent.
I think probably 90% of my success is my drive. There are a lot of designers who are maybe more creative, but maybe they don't work as hard, maybe they don't have my drive. When I was hired in 1990 at Gucci, the company was in such bad shape. By 1993, 94, we were almost bankrupt. By that time, I had assumed the role of design director, and the businessmen who were running the company at the time were spending all their energy focusing on how to break the company apart, what to do with it. So I had this moment where I was in complete creative control, and I could do whatever I thought was right for Gucci. So I designed a collection that was very, very different than anything Gucci had ever done. I also had, at that time, in my contract, the stipulation that I was not allowed to speak to the press, that I was not allowed to publicly be the face of Gucci, that I was not allowed to step out on the runway. I broke all those rules. I did a collection that I believed in. I sent it down the runway, and at the end, I stepped out on the runway. There was a huge amount of excitement, both in the press and from buyers, and buyers started buying the collection. So immediately, 6 months later, those clothes were in the store, and they started to sell. And then I had another collection. Luckily, it was a hit. Another collection. Luckily, it was a hit. And our sales really started to take off. You know, they were doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling. By 1999, we were very successful. And so we bought Yves Saint Laurent.
Ford insisted that all Saint Laurent designers report directly to him, creating a new and unfamiliar hierarchy that Slimane could not abide. After a single disastrous meeting with Ford, Slimane walked out on YSL and the golden ticket he had stumbled across 3 years prior. It seemed insane to many, and rightfully so. Who was Slimane? A 3-year veteran of design to question the messianic and unparalleled wisdom of Tom Ford. In time, we know the answer. Hedi Slimane is a creature entirely unto himself, a force majeure of fashion whose fascination with rock and roll iconography permanently shifted menswear, and with it, the cultural perception of what an ideal man could be. Like the rock gods of old he so idolized, who could come to idolize him in return? Capitulation is simply not a part of his build. It is, and always has been, Hedi's way or the highway.
don't want to. I don't like to define things.
This is what you mean when you said automatic writing. You mean something that just happens, something you have to do.
And this is same with menswear for me. I don't like to define. There's no. I like that it's very open.
The world is full of people who want to define it for you, though.
Everybody wants to define. Yes.
Hedi Slimane was born July 5th, 1968. The son of a Tunisian father and Italian mother, he was raised in the pleasant but unremarkable suburbs of Paris. With a name directly lifted from the traditional Heidi, and the gradual emergence of his svelte frame and pronounced, almost feminine facial features, Slimane always expected his perception of genders would be slightly out of focus. But at an early age, he discovered a cultural respite from the generic machismo of mainstream society. Slimane was 6 years old when he received his first record, a live recording of David Bowie, produced as he tore headlong into his thin white Duke phase. The album was universally panned. Mick Jagger went so far as to claim that if he got the kind of reviews David Live did, he would honestly never record again. But for Slimane, it opened the door to a lifelong love affair with rock and roll. Seeing the pale, dishevelled Bowie on the front cover allowed him to feel at ease with the idea of femininity within masculinity. A concerted interest in his later work as a designer. While Slimane became interested in a wide range of rock subgenres, including the Rolling Stones and the Clash, two bands he would later design for, he has stated that glam rock is the most significant influence for the future in both design and photography. Buying clothes for his hollow silhouette proved a near impossible task, and so at the age of 16, Slimane borrowed his mother's sewing machine and began to design his own. Being svelte, he discovered, had its advantages. I always thought clothes looked better on a lean figure. Life was not that unfair after all. There was a future for skinny people. After high school, Slimane studied art history at the L'École du Louvre in Paris, using his free time to help friends on fashion shoots as a freelance director and casting scout. There were also early aspirations to become a reporter, but he put them aside to spend 3 memorable but destitute years in New York during the early 90s. His first big break came in 1992, when LVMH consultant Jean-Jacques Picard spotted him and on a hunch hired him as an assistant. Together they worked on the project Monogram Canvas for Louis Vuitton, recruiting 7 of the most influential designers in the world, including Helmut Lang, Manolo Blahnik, and Vivienne Westwood, to reinterpret the iconic monogram design in celebration of its centenary. Picard was one of the first to encourage Slimane to become a designer. After 3 years as an assistant, such an opportunity arose in the form of Yves Saint Laurent. Pierre Berger, CEO of YSL at the time, and the stalwart companion of the man for whom the brand is named, had heard of Slimane through reputation, and despite his lack of design experience, deemed him the perfect man to revive the fortunes of YSL menswear. Milan was menswear, and French houses were not interested in men's fashion, Slimane has said. To hire me was an insignificant decision, if you think of it in concrete terms. From a different perspective, I really had, as a kid, a natural attraction to the house of Saint Laurent, and when Pierre Berger took the chance, I thought I was extremely blessed. Slimane admits to initially being petrified of the daunting task ahead of him. His confidence as a designer grew with each passing collection, culminating in the black tie collection that debuted in January 2001. The foreshadowing of his skinny silhouette designs that could later come to dominate the male fashion world. It was the last collection he would design for YSL for over a decade. In the ensuing months, Slimane would reject the stringent authority of Tom Ford and abandon the label he helped redefine. Slimane absconded from Paris. Despite it being his home, he had never felt comfortable there, and moved to the progressive scene of Berlin for 2 years, where he took up residence at the Kunstwerke Institute for Contemporary Art. It was during this time in Berlin that Slimane began to seriously indulge his burgeoning passion for photography. He took pictures of the locals and street kids with a unique flair for style, and perhaps most importantly to his later work, as a music photographer, he began to document the underground dance club scene that Berlin is famed for. The photographs were eventually released to the public through an exhibition and Slimane's first book, the appropriately titled Berlin. Slimane's respite from the fashion world was a short one. During his time in Germany, he was offered the creative directorship of... It was during his time at Dior that Slimane redefined the contemporary masculine concept and elevated himself to a position resembling cult fanaticism in the process.
7 years ago, and I sort of moved on from that idea and from that technique, and I wanted to come back to it.
Vision is definitely different than everyone else's. It's just very heady. It's flawless.
Celebrity clientele began to clamour for Slimane's designs. Brad Pitt asked the designer to create the suit for his wedding to Jennifer Aniston. The next year, Dior saw their profits rise by 41%. After attracting the attention of cultural tastemakers, it became inevitable that the mainstream would follow suit. The traditional Adonis perception of masculinity was tilted on its axis, displaced by a lither and more feminine body type, exemplified by men like Jared Leto and Orlando Bloom. It wasn't just the men either. Despite exclusively designing menswear, Slimane began to draw female wearers like Madonna and Nicole Kidman, women for whom his slender designs transferred across gender lines. In 2002, Slimane became the first menswear designer to win the coveted CFDA award for the International Designer. David Bowie, whom Slimane now dressed for tours, presented him with the award.
He brought to men's collection the smouldering androgyny, a mysterious sexual allure that had always been the exclusive provenance of the women's collection.
Thank you so much for your support. That's all I can say.
The move to Dior had clearly been a masterful one for Slimane. Yves Saint Laurent, by contrast, was imploding. Despite the guidance of the venerable Tom Ford, the company was losing tens of millions of dollars a year, their collections in a creative slump. Rumours swirled of incessant turbulence within the YSL camp. Slimane, however, could seemingly do no wrong. His three great creative passions, music, photography, and design, were becoming seemingly inseparable from one another.
I mean, music has been always so inspiring for fashion, but the time is like late 70s, I would say, when punk emerged in England. And I think in England right now it's really much what's happening. And it's like a total new generation taking over. And I spend a lot of time there, and this is the people I see. So
What Eddie has done with his career is he hasn't played in a band, but he's essentially made a context for himself, which is like everything except playing in a band. He's the quintessential designer as rock star.
Model Kate Moss. Slimane followed Doherty for over a year, chronicling the musician and his signature flair the press would come to describe as skank chic.
The way of an explanation cast adrift up the shores of Shots' nation. If you wanna try, there's no worse you could do. I know you lie, I'm still in love with you.
Slimane's descent into the London underground came to strongly influence his designs and shows. As former band manager Alan McGee attested, every fucking model looked like a libertine. It wasn't just Doherty. Slimane had an uncanny ability to befriend the most influential rock stars on the planet. Mick Jagger and David Bowie rest in his personal Rolodex. So too do Courtney Love and Thomas Mars of French band Phoenix. The designer has dressed everyone from Jack White to Franz Ferdinand to Paul Simonon of seminal punk band The Clash. The key to his popularity, authenticity.
Eddie's things are very simple, but with great detail, and they're very classic, so it means you can wear them from season to season. And I think that's very important. He doesn't change too quickly, but he is probably the most important. The fabrics and the way he cuts and the details and the bijou, 1,000 different pieces of jewelry. I like that.
Slimane prides himself at being on the precipice of the rock movement. His celebrated shows are almost painfully cool. Ultra-modern extravaganzas scored by the buzziest of both unknown and iconic bands, with set designs plucked directly from the youth culture of whatever city he finds himself entrenched in at the time. It's an aesthetic that extends to his audience, more often packed with skeletal musical misfits than the couture designs and haughty critics that so often dominate other collection unveilings. Yet Slimane is something of an anomaly within the culture he adores so much. He doesn't drink, smoke, or take drugs, preferring to consecrate those who do. His demeanor, from every indication, is that of a shy, genial man whose immaculate politeness stands in stark contrast to the template of both the fashion and music industries, two avenues hardly renowned for their abundance of healthy egos. There is one area, beyond the commonality of creativity, that Slimane shares with many of his rock and roll idols: perfectionism. Every aspect of his collections, from conceptualization down to the design, lighting, and casting of his stage shows, is overseen by Slimane with a quibbling sensibility that borders on the infinitesimal. Slimane has distinguished himself from other designers for his penchant of casting unknowns and non-professionals in his shows. He will often draft band members to represent his designs, or otherwise scour the streets looking for just the right personality to mesh with a collection, a process he refers to as boy safari.
Boys, girls, boys, girls.
The guys were chosen, they were sort of a street casting, a lot of them. Some of them are models, but he wanted them to look like themselves, and they're kind of, I don't know if they're skaters or you know, they're kind of punks.
I love that kind of dandy, that kind of grotesque dandy look, and that's what it was for me. I wish more people would take a chance and make clothes like that.
Like every other element of his creative process, he is reluctant to define the essence of his casting. You sort of know if it's working or not, he has glibly remarked in the past. But based on his track record, Slimane prefers his models tall, lean, and slightly androgynous, not overly dissimilar from himself. No one can fault Slimane on his creations. His perfectionist streak and myopic vision for fashion has resulted in a cultural shift in menswear that continues to this day. But such vision often acts as a double-edged sword. His unwillingness to compromise, for all of its vaulted genius, has been the root cause of every major controversy in his career. Slimane was becoming restless towards the end of his tenure at Dior. His contract with the label had expired in 2006, and he wished to spend more time pursuing his extracurricular passions, not only photography, but also architectural spaces and art projects, in which he had dabbled over the previous few years. Dior bent over backwards to accommodate him, negotiating a non-exclusive contract that would free Slimane from the endless cycle of collections and give him more time to pursue his outside interests. Whilst he accepted the new contract, Slimane remained discontent. He was unhappy with the direction the menswear line was taking, and a proposal for his own signature label, one that would allow him to design women's wear for the first time, was wholly unsatisfactory in his eyes. Negotiations broke down a year after signing his non-exclusive contract. Bernard Arnault, the chairman of LVMH, told Slimane to come back to reality. Slimane would do no such thing, releasing a statement that said, "There are areas I will not compromise at all when it comes to my work." For the second time in his career, Slimane walked away from the world of fashion. This time, however, his sabbatical would not last months, but years, relocating from Europe to the seamy underground of the Los Angeles music scene. California was in the early stages of a rock and roll renaissance at the time. Independent label Burger Records had just formed and was encouraging a new wave of psych, surf and punk rock, exemplified by bands like Hunks and His Punks, Mystic Braves and The Garden. Slimane was there to capture it all on camera, immersing himself in the scene for 5 years. Even after returning to fashion, he chose to remain in LA. His time in the underground would later be collaborated into the exhibition Sonic, a photographic chronicling of rock and roll culture since the late 50s. Sonic ran the gamut of his experiences in Berlin, London, New York, and Los Angeles, his grainy black and white photos capturing the essence of rock and roll. Grimy venues replete with spilled drinks and sweat, the raw energy and anger of the fans, the youthful, eternal cool of the bands, regardless of age and era. It was an essence that reflected his design philosophy. Slimane has described his work as a reflection of the transient age between childhood and adulthood, what most of us would colloquially describe as being a teenager. That same ethos is at the core of rock and roll. There will always be disenfranchised youths trying to find their friends, trying to find their place, according to Burger Records co-founder Lee Rickard. Slimane certainly had friends. During his self-imposed exile, he shot portraits of celebrities as diverse as Amy Winehouse, Lady Gaga, Gisele Bündchen, and Robert De Niro. His place, however, proved to be more elusive. Slimane continued to keep a weather eye on the world of fashion, consistently toying with the idea of returning to the field in which he made his name. Many within the fashion industry were less than inviting. Slimane had managed to burn a number of important bridges on his way out that to this day remain unrepaired. Karl Lagerfeld, who once included Slimane in his entourage and famously lost 10 kilos to fit the new slim dictum of Dior, stopped wearing his clothes. Jean-Jacques Picard, the man who initially encouraged Slimane to become a designer in the first place, had fallen into bad terms with his former assistant. When the disgraced John Galliano was excommunicated from Dior in 2011, rumors swirled of a triumphant return from Slimane. But his perfection again got the better of him, and the label refused to acquiesce to demands that included even more creative control and a worldwide refurbishment of every Dior boutique store and outlet. But there was one influential figure from Slimane's past who remained steadfast in his corner, Pierre Berger, the man behind the curtain at Yves Saint Laurent. YSL had continued to struggle through the years Slimane designed at Dior. Tom Ford had left the label in 2004 after the pressure of designing for YSL and Gucci simultaneously proved too demanding. To say nothing of his notoriously frosty relationship with Yves Saint Laurent himself, who felt the changes Ford made were an insult to the legacy of his label. Stefano Pilati, head of YSL's ready-to-wear department, inherited the mantle of the creative director. It took 6 slow years, but Pilati managed to pull the company out of freefall through his successful accessory designs. His collections, however, were hit and miss. Some were beloved by critics and celebrities alike, while others barely registered on the fashion radar. For Yves Saint Laurent, the designs were simply not up to scratch. Some of it is good, some of it is not so good, he once remarked of his Pilates work. Berger agreed with his longtime partner, going so far as to purposefully remove him from the guest list of a YSL retrospective in 2010. Making matters worse were the rumors floating through the fashion industry that Pilates' head was perennially due to roll. For months, there was speculation that Raf Simons would be replacing the deposed Pilati when his inevitable resignation came about. The rumors, as always, were half right. Pilati was gone by early 2012, but it would not be Simons that replaced him. Instead, it was Slimane. While Berger, who had not been CEO at YSL since 2002, despite retaining serious clout, claims he never actively championed Slimane for the role of creative director, it was a perfect match.
Wonderful, extraordinaire, amazing. I love the show. The greatest show I've ever seen since Saint Laurent's day.
Not everyone saw the recruitment from Berger's point of view. Slimane had lost favour with the critics who so adored him during his time at Dior. When he sauntered into the house of Yves Saint Laurent and began to make sweeping changes, many saw the opportunity to fashion their pens into pitchforks. Under the perfectionist dictum of Slimane, stores were refitted to his specifications. The headquarters were relocated from Paris to Los Angeles, and perhaps most blasphemous of all, Yves was dropped from the name of the label. Critics demanded an explanation, but Slimane remained silent on the changes. Tensions mounted between the media and Slimane in the lead-up to his debut collection, with newly christened Saint Laurent Paris, especially when told of their requirements for entry into the show. Only approved photos of Slimane could be used in conjunction with articles. The brand was never to be referred to as its former name, and unlike the majority of designers, Slimane would neither be providing references for his collection, nor would he be speaking to the media after the show. Slimane had undoubtedly earned the near-unanimous ire of critics across the world, but fashion aficionados were more optimistic. There was tremendous hype surrounding the debut women's wear collection of Saint Laurent Paris, the first Slimane had designed in his career. He had stiff competition. Raf Simons, who had stepped into the creative directorship of Dior following the departure of John Galliano, unveiled his first collection just prior to the Saint Laurent Paris show, to thunderous applause. The fashion world expected Slimane to receive the same rapturous reception, but it never came. His debut collection was intended as a retrospective nod to the past works of Yves Saint Laurent, a way of acknowledging the past before moving the label into the present. Embroidered chiffon blouses and ruffled capelets, flared dresses and gold-sequined cardigan jackets all evoked a distinctly 70s touch, contemporized with a leathery touch of rock and roll and the Slimane staple of the uncannily thin construction.
I like it very much, and suddenly we have Saint Laurent. After so many years, it was so difficult, and now Saint Laurent is back, and I'm very, very happy.
I think it's marvelous. It's a genius.
There seems to be a real sexy tendency this season, no? And what I think is that there's a lot of things that a lot of girls would love to wear tomorrow. Like Kate Moss said, oh my God, this is so me, I want it all.
I think it was marvelous, fantastic, completely in the Maison style, and so it's really respected Saint Laurent, so it's perfect.
There were a number of noteworthy names in Slimane's corner following the show. An eclectic gaggle including Anna Wintour, Lady Gaga and Kate Moss found the collection enchanting. Designer Diane von Furstenberg was old enough to have seen the debut collection of Yves Saint Laurent and found it beautiful. I thought it was pure Saint Laurent and I recognized my youth, she gushed. But to the great delight of critics, the collection failed to connect with a wider audience. The Business of Fashion website wrote that the game was up the moment they heard the somewhat muted applause and hushed voices after the show. What was most surprising, concluded esteemed reporter Lisa Armstrong, was how unsurprising it was. Others were less kind. The lack of professional courtesy smacked of ignorance or arrogance, wrote New York Times critic Catherine Horan. I had the impression from the clothes of someone disconnected from fashion of the past several years.